In this video, we're going to continue our exploration of process improvement methodologies, taking a look at domain-based process improvement in the Kaizen event. And what I'd like to do next is share an applied case about travel reimbursement. And the specific learning objectives are to, well, to use an applied process improvement project that utilized domain problem-solving approaches. And I like this case because it's instead of production or manufacturing focused, it's transactional. And it also has an internal customer versus your traditional external facing customer. One of the reasons, though, why I like this case is because it helps us to understand and explore some of the issues that a process improvement project team has with the early scoping of a project. It's a common kickoff issue that most process improvement teams have, so we'll explore scoping issues. It also is a case that has 3 out of the 4 characteristics of poorly performing processes that in earlier videos we took a look at 4 big characteristics: white space, rework loop, process variation, and lean waste. And this case shows examples of the first 3. And finally, I choose this case because it will help introduce time-based metrics and some of the terms associated with time-based metrics, as well as how to use time-based metrics as a quality and performance measure. This is a case about travel reimbursement and an employee who worked at a firm in which they did a lot of company travel and needed to be reimbursed for the expenditures that they made on behalf of the company travel and activities. So the customer is an employee, and their goal or the request that they're looking for is to receive a check that they can then deposit in the bank and pay off the credit card bills that are associated with the expenditures that they made. And so that person at the end is me. And this is one of the very first process improvement projects that I worked on a number of years ago. And it was a very frustrating process. I knew it always took a long time for me to get my travel reimbursement check. And it was a check in those days. I didn't get anything direct deposited. You'd actually get a paper check dropped off to you. Somebody from HR would actually drop that off right on my desk. And it took a long time. And if it took too long, I was responsible for having to cover the credit card bill or at least pay the minimum payment. It was very frustrating for me. So let me show that frustration with, there we go, frowny face, eyebrows. So we know that all processes have a beginning and an end. That's one of the characteristics of processes that we looked at in earlier videos. I've just described the end when I received that check. Where is the beginning? And here was the first dilemma that we had when we were assigned to work on this project as a process improvement team. Oh, by the way, this was not only frustrating for me, but it was frustrating for everybody in the organization. It turned out that one important end user had a travel reimbursement occurrence that took not 14 hours, not days, but it took 14 weeks for this person to receive their travel reimbursement check. And this person had a special title in the organization. They were the head of our facility. The company that I worked at it had 4 different branches, one located in Madison, one in San Francisco, one in Chicago, and that's where our corporate office was, and one in London. And she was the head of our Madison, Wisconsin branch. It took her 14 weeks. So it was because of that painful experience that Sue decided a process improvement project needed to be performed to help with all of these angry internal customers. And what we wanted to do was improve the time it took to do travel reimbursement. It was never that we didn't get an accurate check. We always got the right amount of money. It just took too darn long. So, um, We brought together a process improvement team, and one of the first questions that that team had was, where is start? All processes have both a beginning and an end, and we can use beginning and end as a way, in many ways, to scope the initiative. Like most poorly performing processes, one of the characteristics of poorly performing processes is that frequently not everybody agrees on what the start point is. And we had three different conditions that most folks were arguing about. Some folks argued that this process actually began at the following location. We had a number of folks say, hey, the beginning of the travel reimbursement process is when the employee comes back from travel and fills out the form and initiates this request. Others in the organization said, no, 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 it needs to go further upstream. The travel reimbursement actually begins at when the first expense is incurred, whether the first expense is the first hotel night or the airline ticket or the meal that you purchase. And others felt that it went further upstream. I'm kind of running out of screen real estate here, but that is a hard little box to read, and it was decision to send the employee. Some folks felt that travel reimbursement began when a decision was made that the organization that we needed to send an employee out to do, well, in this case it was me doing field service installations, was the client organization important enough to send a field service engineer out? And which field service engineer should go out. So the decision to send the employee should be the kickoff for this process. So we've got option A for form fill out, option B for first expense incurred, and option C for decision to send the employee. And now what I'd like to have you do is think about which one best represents the end-to-end system and for what should we scope our investigative efforts on trying to improve. Press pause, think about it, and then come back and I'll tell you what we ended up with. All right, we're back. We've been trying to figure out where should we scope this process improvement project. Should it be at option A, form fill out, option B, first expense incurred, or option C, decision to send the employee? And here's what the team agreed upon. We decided as a team that we should go furthest upstream, decision to send the employee, and we'd explore all of the activities and steps that led to an eventual receiving of the check. We put this down in a project initiation document called a project charter, and then we shared it with the project sponsor, who happened to be Sue, who experienced that painful 14-week occurrence. And this is what she said. Whoa, 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 whoa. Hold on, people. I don't have enough time or money for you to investigate or explore all of the activities that you're scoping in from the decision to send employee all the way to the receiving of the check. If we go all the way upstream to decision to send employee, that includes things like the staffing process. It includes our sales cycle process. It includes a lot more than just the steps involved to get the reimbursement check that's taking us such a darn long time. You've got only 3 weeks to work on this initiative. We've got $5,000 total for whatever solutions you come up with, and you cannot play around with our enterprise resource planning system. That big system is a candidate for a much bigger upgrade implementation, and so no messing around with the ERP system as well. And so with this new information, our team had to go back to the drawing board. The reason why I start the story out this way is that most process improvement projects and process improvement teams have early scoping questions. And when you're forced into scoping down or trying to reduce the amount that you will be investigating or the time spent on that investigation, we want to move the first step to as close as possible to the last step, but it has to satisfy a couple of conditions. It has to still contain all of the necessary steps to create the output that we're looking for. In this case, the output for travel reimbursement is that check, and that has to still bound the frustration that is being felt by the end user. And when it came to the 14-week experience that Sue felt, when it came to my frustrating travel reimbursement, that closest step to the last step that still created the output, a check, and bounded the frustration, that became form fill out. So our team agreed that we would describe this process as everything from form fill out to the receiving of the check and depositing. And when we chose a team leader, that person had the most subject matter expertise when it came to travel reimbursement. It was the head of our Madison branch accounting group. He happened to have spent he spent over 10 years working in that accounting group. They were the group that did a lot of the processing of the requests and the creating of the checks, and had done hundreds of these. And so when we asked him, if we take a look at all of the time and activities that it takes from form fill out to the receiving of the check, how long do you think it takes? Here was his response. It doesn't take 14 weeks. Sue's one-time experience was truly a 1 in 1,000 event. We rarely have travel reimbursement fulfillment that takes that long. It takes much less. And when we asked him, well, how long do you think that is? He said, I think it's about 2 weeks. We, of course, asked the follow-up question that I'm sure you're thinking right now too, which is, well, when you say it takes about 2 weeks, do you actually have any data to support this? And here's what he said. We collect all sorts of data when it comes to travel reimbursement. We collect how much we spend on travel, which departments spend the most, which travelers travel the most and the least. We categorize by spend types, whether it's lodging or meals or any of a dozen other categories, whether it's taxable across different states or different regions. We collect lots of data, but we haven't been collecting time-based data. Um, Part of the reason why I share this case with you is because for most poorly performing processes, one of the characteristics of a poorly performing process is that it is typically not measured well. And by not measured well, I mean there may be a lot of data that's collected, but the data doesn't represent the frustration that your customers are feeling, and that was the case for us. And so when we asked them, you think it takes about 2 weeks, do you have any data? The answer was no. So we had to go out and capture some data on current state performance. By the way, this time metric that we just described from the beginning of the first step to the end of the last step for one completed request to move through the system successfully, it's given a special name in the world of process improvement. This total time in the system, it's called lead time. Sometimes we'll see it abbreviated as LT. From the beginning of the first step to the end of the last step is lead time. Let's now take a look at what the remaining steps were in the travel reimbursement process. To stick to our promise of keeping each of these content lectures under 15 minutes, I'm going to pause now and we'll continue with the travel reimbursement case in part two. In part two, we'll look at all the specific steps. We'll introduce concepts including cycle time and take a look at some of the characteristics that led to the poor performance that we saw in the system. That will all get covered in part two of travel reimbursement.